Alright, we are back with the Denjin charge. So Denjin charge, down, down, punch, any punch, and you get the Denjin charge. What does the Denjin charge do? You've probably worked this out already. If you press light or medium fireball, you get your regular fireballs, but if you press heavy, you get the Denjin, which is basically the same as the OD fireball. It's probably even a little bit faster, and then Denjin OD is like lightning speed. Denjin fireballs do a bit more damage. That does 600. Denjin fireball does 800. Yeah, so that's not really a big deal. It's mostly the Denjin fireball, you use it in fireball wars because it hits twice. You've probably figured that out by platinum. And you can also use it in these close range situations where sometimes you'd throw an OD. Instead you throw a Denjin if you think your opponent's sort of creeping into you and they're not being cautious enough. The real use of the Denjin, I would say, is the heavy Hashogeki. So again, if you press light or medium Hashogeki, it won't use up your Denjin charge. But if you press heavy Hashogeki, it will use up your Denjin charge. And you see there that heavy Hashogeki with the Denjin charge is only 20 frames, which means that it's much harder for your opponent to react to you using it and DI you. It's also much more viable in just kind of combo strings, this kind of thing, and then you're +3 instead of +2. So the main thing that I use the Denjin for is just to get more plus frames in a lot of situations, particularly when we are in the corner. And also when we want to get into our opponent's face, we can use this sequence pretty easily because you can do a max range crouch medium kick and be right in front of your opponent like that at +3, which is really tasty, right? And I think one thing that's really worth mentioning here is that because the Denjin charge doesn't use any gauge, where you would usually drive rush to get into that situation, which takes 3 gauge, once your Denjin charged up, you can basically just come in like that for free. All right. The other use of the Denjin charge is then the OD Hashogeki. This one, which leaves you at +4, which is pretty tasty. But the real thing you want to watch is the drive gauge damage. Right. Look at that. Oosh, took off a whole bar. Right. But we had to spend a bar to take off that. We had to spend 2 bars, sorry, to take off that bar. And generally speaking, I think you just want to use regular OD Hashogeki for that, which takes off half a bar. So you can do a sequence like this. Right, and then you've taken off nearly 3 bars of theirs for 2 bars of yours, because crouching heavy punch does massive drive gauge damage. Look at that, even more than back heavy punch. So I just wouldn't really worry about this sequence because you need to be very aware in a match of like what your opponent's drive gauge is, and then how you're going to use their burnout situation to your advantage. And I think that's more of a master level thing. Like I certainly didn't find myself using this much in Diamond, but it is something to think about. Boom, look at that. And then they're in burnout. And then, you know, particularly if you get them into burnout with that last one, because you're already +4, now you can just continue your burnout pressure. And that is what we're going to talk about next when we talk about Hashogeki. But just before I talk about Hashogeki, I want to talk a little bit about when to get the Denjin charge. And the answer is very rarely. So if you are in a fireball war with someone and you get a knockdown on them, then it's worth Denjin charging, right? You're way too far away to get the Oki, and it's going to make you stronger in that fireball war. Oftentimes you'll get a knockdown with the OD fireball, with the Denjin fireball, and you can just reload the Denjin straight away. But usually in fireball wars, Ryu's going to lose. So I don't really think that you want to be doing that, say, against a Guile. Like if you get a knockdown against a Guile, then just drive rush straight in behind it and try to get some screen position. Because ultimately what you're trying to do against Guile is get in. Yeah. So I can't think of too many characters where you'd want to bully them with a Denjin and just reload. But maybe someone like Zangief or Manon who's really trying to get close to you. Even there, you might want to just walk forward and take up space instead. The times where you definitely want a Denjin charge are when you hit someone with a donkey kick mid-screen. So let's put Luke back to block after first hit. So in this situation, you would absolutely Denjin charge, right? There's no way that you can get Oki in this situation. There's no way that Luke can punish you. Kami's level 3 can punish you, but let's not worry about that. The thing about donkey kicks is that you very rarely do them in mid-screen. I'm going to introduce them in the next video in Platinum 3, so we'll talk about when to use them. But for donkey kick to be useful, you have to be playing in this danger zone kinda all the time. And they're sort of a complement to your fireball game. So light fireball is 16 frames. Medium donkey kick, which is the one you want to be using, is 18 frames. The reason why you want to be using medium donkey is because light donkey, while quicker at 14 frames, is -11. So it's just too punishable. Like, people can punish that with a sweep. Whereas medium donkey, if you space it well like that, it's -8. And really the only character I think who can punish that often is Ken. Everyone else would just be too far out of range. Donkey kick does really nice gauge damage, does half a bar of gauge damage. It also just keeps people out. It's a kind of irritating button because the foot is active for ages, 9 frames, and it's like right out in front of Ryu. So people don't kind of think that they're about to walk into it. Like, you wouldn't think that you're going to get hit, but if Luke takes a micro step forward, that's going to get him. So it's quite a useful button in these kind of neutral situations to just occasionally throw out. And I also like to do the heavy very, very occasionally, because even though the heavy is 30 frames, it's got mad damage and you can get it to the point where it's +1. It's just very, very susceptible to drive impact. The time that heavy is good is after back throw. Right, in that situation. So you get to -4 there, there's no way you can be punished. They have to wake up drive impact, which most people aren't going to do because they're not used to seeing you throw out a heavy donkey kick. But I can't really think of too many other situations where you do it. Sometimes when your opponent tech throws, it's good to do. So if I go, yeah, let's have a look. Yeah, then they're at exactly the right spacing for it. But you've got to get the timing right. And you can see already that this isn't something that I do. Not a lot of players tech generally, but that's a situation where you can follow up with the heavy. Part of the reason why I don't like donkey is because in the low grades, as we just discussed, people be jumping all the time and people just generally crazy. Like, the donkey works if players are generally on the ground moving back and forth, because it's another layer of stuff to think about in that situation. Right, so anyway, you don't get knockdowns off donkey kicks in the mid-screen very often, but when you do, get a Denjin charge. If you get a different sort of situation where Denjin charging is an option, like off your heavy punish, for example, which we've talked about before. Oops. Right, there we can Denjin charge. I generally think you just want the Oki. So if you do that mid-screen, then you're going to get a Denjin charge, but your opponent's going to be away from you. What's the point of the Denjin charge? The point of the Denjin charge is to get you a Hashogeki in front of their face. They block it, you're +3. So the point of it is to get you a cheap strike throw mix-up. But if you get Oki, you have a strike throw mix-up anyway. So in that situation we just saw, I think this is just almost always what you want to do, right? You get more corner carry and you get Okazeme. And then you're already giving them a strike throw mix-up and you're taking them to the corner where Ryu is vicious. So you don't want to be doing Denjin charges mid-screen off that sequence or off this sequence, I think. Right, those are fine. Like, you've got a Denjin charge, now we can get back into Luke's face this way. Right, it's not a terrible situation, but I think generally you want to take the Oki. The exception is when you hit your opponent into the corner. So if I was to do it here and Denjin charge, remember that here I'm going to be +7 on wake up. Let's have a look. So what's the combo? Why am I so bad at this? Wow, I was +9 there. So I can actually wake up with a heavy punch. So let's put Luke on wake up reversal. And he's going to wake up with his crouching light punch. Right. And so now we can do... Boom! Mad damage. All right. The other reason why this is great is because say Luke doesn't wake up with that. Say he wakes up just moving backwards for 5 frames. All right. Then we're going to be plus, and so that heavy Denjin that we did is just going to give us more plus frames, and we can continue our pressure. Yeah, there we are, +3. Now, one thing that's hard to see is that the gap that is left between the heavy punch and the heavy Denjin is very, very small. So even though you can get a DI snuck through there, very few players will hit the drive impact at the right time to get it through that window, because the heavy punch does big block stun, and then you cancel the heavy punch during that block stun into the Hashogeki. So it's just a really nice sequence, because if you hit with the heavy punch and the Hashogeki, then you really mess them up. The other situation that you'll get here is if you're coming in with the low drive rush, then it's worth doing. Right, but he's still too far away for me to do it there. So it's going to be more like this sort of range. And then we're +7, right? And +7, +9, you can get the heavy punch out in both situations, because the 10 frame heavy punch is going to be faster than their jab. But if you want to be able to hit confirm, then you can also do this sequence, and you'll actually get a little bit more damage before you go into the Hashogeki. So let's have a look at that again. Right, and then I did 1.5 gauge damage to Luke, no gauge for myself, and I'm +3 in his face, ready to give him another strike throw mix up. So that's really quite powerful, and that's basically the only time that I find myself consistently getting the Denjin charge, is when I'm Denjin charging on top of my opponent here in the corner, and then it's quite tasty. Okay. But yeah, generally speaking, I think you should just always take the Oki mid-screen. It's just going to be more useful to you, even against characters like Zangief and Manon, who are generally coming to you. When you have Oki, you have an opportunity to do good damage. All right, let's talk about the Hashogeki then a bit. And obviously Denjin Hashogeki is going to be a big part of what we're discussing. So let's have a chat about each one, and we'll start with the medium Hashogeki because it's the least useful. The medium Hashogeki has 2 purposes. The most important one is in level 3 combos. There are some level 3 super combos, particularly mid-screen, where if you finish them with a donkey kick, you will kick Luke too far away. Let's range. Yeah, there we go. So we whiffed there. So if you're ever suspicious that you might whiff, then what you want to do is go into the medium Hashogeki, and because the medium Hashogeki brings Ryu closer to your opponent, it will always combo into the level 3 super. It's obviously a bit more annoying than the donkey, because in the donkey you've already done 1 quarter circle forward, so you just do another one to get your super out, whereas Hashogeki is in the opposite direction, so you've still got to do 2 quarter circles forward. All right, but that's the main use for medium. The other use is if your opponent is able to drive impact react against your heavy Hashogeki. So if you've got a situation, let's have a look. So we're going to have Luke block all, and then in reversal settings, we've got to have Luke, block, and then DI on reaction. So he's going to block our pressure string of 3 count pressure string. Maybe he'll just block a 1 count pressure string, and we'll use heavy punch. So heavy punch is a nice way to go into Hashogeki, but Luke can drive impact react. Now that's on reaction. Let's say that they delay it 5 frames, right? So they're checking to see what you actually do. Maybe we'll be even more lenient. 4 frames. They're checking to see whether you do a Hashogeki, and when they see you charge up the Hashogeki, they come on with the drive impact. Right? There's no way I can get my drive impact out there, even if I'm mashing. But if I do, if we've got the heavy Hashogeki, Luke's going to beat us there. But if we do medium, then we can get our DI out in time. So the medium punch Hashogeki is something that is worth sneaking into your arsenal once you see your opponent drive impacting your heavy Hashogeki. Then you know that they've rehearsed this scenario, they think that they're clever, but actually you're just going to bait them by doing that. Now note that off heavy punch, the block stun for Hashogeki is actually so substantial that it's kind of often becomes a true block string. So mostly you want to be doing this off medium punch, this kind of situation, because then their DI will definitely come out. Alright, so that's the medium Hashogeki. I think we've already talked about the main use for the OD Hashogeki, which is chip damage. But there's one other way that's important to think about the OD Hashogeki, which is that it leaves you +3 in their face. Now, this is like not as much of a thing in Street Fighter 6 as it was in Street Fighter 5. And I'm not quite sure why. So in Street Fighter 6, it's hard to get plus frames. It's hard to get frame traps. And this is a situation where you spend 2 bar and it gives you a 50-50 against your opponent. I just want to put throw escape back to random. And that's like kind of a big deal. Like if someone's blocking you and you just find that they're always able to keep blocking you and you just want to continue your pressure, then this is 2 gauge to continue your pressure. Right, you can follow it up with that sort of sequence. This was quite common in Street Fighter 5 with Nakali. So Nakali, who I used to play in Street Fighter 5, had this OD stomp move that wasn't a frame trap because it was a pure block string off his like crouching medium punch. But the reason why you still did it occasionally is because it left you at +2 and on top of them. So you could get pressure in front of your opponent's face. So that is one use for the OD, and I think it's particularly useful when your opponent's nearly dead. So, you know, you've got a situation where one combo or one throw is going to kill them, then you just want to follow up with that sequence, and I'd probably throw them afterwards for the most part because they're going to be panicking and they're not going to think that they need to jab in that situation if they've already just blocked a bunch of your moves. Alright, so that's one situation where you do want to use the OD or where you can integrate it and it's helpful to your game. The Denjin charged OD Hashogeki, the main use of this is to continue your combos on the cheap. So we've already talked about how you can do this sequence to get into your opponent's phase. At higher levels, some opponents will be able to like perfect parry there or even drive impact in that situation, but they won't be able to do it on that one because it's too fast and the gap is so small at 4 frames. And so one way to think about OD Denjin Charge is as a cheaper version of the drive rush cancel because it gets you the same situation. So if we drive rush cancel, we end up in our opponent's face, we're plus, and we've traveled a little bit of distance, but that cost us 3 gauge. The OD Denjin Charge does exactly the same thing. It leaves you +4 in front of your opponent's face. You can get the strike throw mix up, and it only costs you 2 bars. So that's one way to use it, and I think that's the only way that you guys need to worry about. And I think until you get to master, you don't even need to worry about that. Just do the meterless version. No one's going to interrupt the meterless version. The other use for OD Denjin, which I can't do, but is a big deal in master level, is to hit confirm heavy punch into OD Denjin. So it's, I didn't get it out quite in time there. That's it. Alright, I'll just explain this very briefly. So what you do is you're walking around pressing heavy punch and then buffering the Hashogeki. Look at my inputs on the side. You can see I'm pressing quarter circle back, but I'm only going to press the double punch for the OD Hashogeki if I confirm. Yeah. Now that does huge amounts of damage. Heavy punch is a nice pressure button because it's -2, but look how far away he is from me. So I can just kind of bully with this button quite effectively. And when you watch high level Ryus, they will bully a lot with their heavy punch. And then just every now and then when you hit, you're buffering. Oh, I was too slow. Oosh. Right, now I can do this pretty well in training mode, but I absolutely cannot do it in a match. So this, now that I'm master with Ryu, if I wanted to keep playing Ryu, this would be one of the first things that I'd be working on. And you see like Maturin and Daigo, when he's using Ryu, do this a lot. But I think this is just too hard for Platinum, and you really don't need it in the low grades. Just use your regular Denjin extension, because that combos and that will get you plenty of damage. Alright, so we've covered the OD Denjin charged Hashogeki, we've covered the OD Hashogeki, we've covered the medium Hashogeki. They're the three that you don't really use much. We've also basically covered heavy Hashogeki in other videos. You use it to get yourself plus frames, but most of the time you want to be doing this one instead. The difference is that you can't do a solar plexus after a heavy punch. So when you do heavy punch, sometimes you can Hashogeki to keep your pressure going. And I think in Platinum, you should just be bullying people with that until they show you that they can DI, and then you can start to get that mind game going with medium Hashogeki. In High Diamond, people will just be like consistently beating that Hashogeki, and so you only want to throw it in every now and then when you're walking around bullying people with heavy punch, which we are going to talk about in Diamond, because it is a pretty useful tool. Once you've got people playing the neutral, you should be throwing out a lot of heavy punches. It's one of Ryu's best buttons. Okay, so even heavy Hashogeki, not so interesting. The light Hashogeki is where we really need to talk about a bit of stuff. So the light Hashogeki, obviously -3, which isn't great. And it moves you forward. So if your opponent blocks it, come on Luke, don't let me down here. Right? If he blocks it there and I'm -3, then he's going to be able to throw me. And if I try to jab, then I'm massively at -3. So I put myself in a strike throw mix up. So I generally don't think that you want to be using Hashogeki as a default combo ender. Like, you don't want to be going like this on block strings, right? If we put Luke to block all, you don't just want to be doing this all the time. The reason why you see pros do that actually like all the time is that they parry afterwards, right? And they try to get a perfect parry. And this creates a totally different mind game. So like, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it on demand here. But again, say we put Luke on block reversal, crouching light punch, no delay, but we put him on a count of 3. Yeah, well, I need him on a count of 4 then. Okay, so that was too slow. All right. There. Oh, that wasn't too bad. That was actually all right there. I got it second time. But I have practiced that a bit because, again, I think that's something that as you move into master rank is hugely important. It's a really big part of Ryu being able to continue his pressure, and Ryu has quite good what's called stagger pressure, which is something that we'll talk about a bit in Diamond. But I don't think this is platinum level stuff, doing this sequence and then parrying, because most people won't even know that you're -3 and they won't jab afterwards. And if you're perfect parrying, then a lot of low rank players are just going to throw you instead. And they're going to throw you by default. So they're not even going to really respect that you're parrying or anything like that. They're just not going to be in the mind game. They're too stupid to be in the mind game, as it were. So I don't think you should be using Hashogeki after pressure strings. But you can do it occasionally, and we talked about this in a previous video, that if you often do this and then just back up, maybe throw a solar plexus occasionally, maybe do a heavy punch occasionally, but often you're just going to do that and chill, right? And then if you see Luke throwing out that jab like that, and a lot of players, myself included, are a bit jab happy. I used to be very jab happy. Then you can just occasionally do that and you'll blow them up, right? And that is, I think, the main use for the Hashogeki in that pressure string situation, is just every now and then you'll get a blow up and you can be ready to follow up with a Tatsu, or be ready to follow up, with the Denjin charge combo. All right. We've also talked about the other main use for the light Hashogeki, which is after wake up, getting the +2 on Oki. But one thing that we haven't talked about is burnout pressure. And this is where I think really Hashogeki, light Hashogeki, starts to shine. So now we've got him on burnout, and we'll always be able to reset to burnout. Now remember that in burnout, your opponent is going to be an extra 4 frames of disadvantage on block. So if he blocks my Hashogeki, instead of me being -3, I'm now +1. The other thing is that light Hashogeki moves you forward. So you can get a lot of these kind of silly pressure strings against Luke, or generally on burnout, where you just Hashogeki people to death. Equally, a lot of your light punch is now +3 on block, so there's not much they can do there. If they try to come in and pressure you, you're going to win. Right, this is a true block string. Right, so you can just keep Hashogeking them, throw that one out occasionally. Right, and the idea is just to push them to the corner. Like, they can block this out, although occasionally you should be trying to throw them. Right. And light punch here, standing light punch has slightly more range, so we want to use that one. But we're just trying to get screen position, and then eventually we get the throw in, or we get them to the corner, and then they're in a world of trouble. But I find that this to be quite a useful sequence when someone's in burnout, especially in the lower grades. People don't really know what's going on in burnout, and they'll try to interrupt in the middle of that pressure string, and you'll be able to do mad damage. So I think that's the main use of light Hashogeki, is in pressure strings of that sort. All right, I think we've covered everything. So remember that the Denjin charge, you should only really be doing it after donkey kicks in the neutral. If you can get Oki instead of, say, a heavy Hashogeki punish, then you should just take the Oki, right? Get corner carry, get on top of your opponent. The only exception is when you can get Denjin charge on top of someone in the corner like this, because you will be plus, they won't know that, and you'll get huge damage off the Denjin charge combo, right? Of course, you also have that stun combo that we've talked about in previous videos. But yeah, so Denjin is not a huge part of Ryu's game, but it can be useful. And as you get better, you will start to use donkey kick more and more, and the game will become more and more back and forth in the neutral, and then you'll start to have Denjin charge more, and then you can also start to do the heavy punch hit confirming, right? But this is real master level stuff. All right, in terms of which Hashogekis to use, I won't go through everything that we talked about, but the main one is that heavy Hashogeki gets you plus frames, and light Hashogeki is useful in burnout. I wouldn't do this very often until you've got your opponent used to you doing other stuff, but it's usually more powerful just to catch them with a heavy punch at the low levels rather than trying to catch them mashing. But if you do see someone mashing, then the light Hashogeki is a good option. All right, I will see you in the next video.